Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you for joining FinOps Accelerate, our virtual panel discussion. Our goal at FinOps Accelerate is to gather FinOps industry experts to discuss strategies, tips, and solutions to simplify FinOps for all. I'm Saloni Fotella. I'm the Director of Marketing at CloudKeeper. I'm going to be the moderator at today's session. So just to give you a brief about CloudKeeper, CloudKeeper is a FinOps and cost optimization solution which delivers instant savings, complete visibility, and FinOps support to our customers. CloudKeeper has helped over 300 customers save an average of 20% on their cloud spends. So the topic of our discussion today is fumbles in FinOps adoption and how to avoid them. As you all know, many companies are still struggling with unexpected high cloud costs. I was reading a recent report by Everest Group, which talked about this cloud cost conundrum, which says that around 67% of organizations end up spending more than they had budgeted for. And whereas on the other hand, there are 82% who are wasting at least 10% of their cloud spend. Considering these statistics, cloud cost management has become a game changer for all businesses. And at the heart of this strategic shift lies FinOps, a discipline that brings together people, processes, and tools to optimize cloud costs and boost business value. As per the recent State of FinOps report, organization adoption of FinOps still lies as one of the key priorities and one of the key challenges for FinOps practitioners. Adopting FinOps isn't easy, and this is due to the numerous challenges that it brings, dealing with multiple cloud platforms, not having enough skilled staff, and poor teamwork across departments are just some of those challenges. So we are here today at our panel discussions, and we have with us FinOps leaders from different areas who will share insights on 4 common challenges in adopting FinOps, namely, equating FinOps solely with cost reduction, collaboration across teams, setting and tracking the right KPIs, and choosing the right FinOps tools. So we move on to the agenda for today's panel discussion. We will first start off with a round of introduction of our esteemed panelists, and we'll move on after that to the panel discussion and post that Q&A round. I would request all of you to put in your questions in the chat window, and we will try to take them at the end of the session. So let's start with the round of introductions. First up, we have Vaz, who has joined us from Canada. Vaz is Principal FinOps Practice as well as Product Management at FinOps Foundation. I mean, who doesn't know FinOps Foundation here, right? So Vaz, over to you for a quick round of introduction of yourself.
Hey, everybody. Thanks. First of all, I just want to say thank you to the CloudKeeper team for inviting me to join today's panel. I am based in Canada. I'm based in Ottawa. My background is in software development, and I'm an infrastructure engineer by training. I've been doing FinOps essentially from the beginning, helped develop the first FinOps platform, helped establish the first FinOps professional services practice in the world, helped write the first Cloud FinOps book, both first and second editions. And I'm at the FinOps Foundation. There, my responsibilities include best practices and standards for the community. And I work on initiatives like the FinOps Framework, the State of FinOps Report, the FinOps Landscape, and I help create requirements around certification for tools and service providers. So that's a little bit about me.
That's quite a lot, Vaz, actually. I don't know how you manage it all, but great. Thank you so much, Vaz. Next up, we have Deepak. Deepak splits his time between Singapore and India. He's the CEO of CloudKeeper, and he's also a member of the governing body of FinOps Foundation. Deepak, over to you for your introduction.
Thank you, Saloni. Hi, everyone. Deepak, CEO and co-founder of CloudKeeper, and I also sit on the governing board of FinOps Foundation. Just quick 2 lines about CloudKeeper, what we do. So we work with high growth technology companies across the globe to help them optimize their cloud spend and get the best value from their investments on the cloud, and by adopting FinOps principles and adopting generally accepted, best practices around cloud. So that's what we essentially do. Very, very excited to be sharing the stage with Vas and Brian. I mean, truly thought leaders, and learning from them, and also sharing some of the learnings that I've had working with more than 300 customers across the globe over the last 6 years. So looking forward to a very insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Next, we have Brian, who's joining us here today from US. And Brian is a FinOps leader, and he's also the founder and the podcast host for Tech Money Talks. Brian also wears multiple hats, and he's also recently authored 2 books. Brian, over to you for your introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Saloni. And yeah, pleased to meet everyone here today. I think a lot of great stuff to talk about, but a little bit about myself. A little over 20 years experience in the tech industry. I worked with 2 out of the big 4 firms and actually helped create the FinOps technology consulting practice globally back then. And then over the past few years, I've really focused on FinOps. And then, like was mentioned, host the Tech Money Talks podcast. But really, throughout my journey, I've helped companies not only find savings, but I also help them recover millions of dollars worth of reducing their wasted cloud spend. So experience in all different facets. And then related to that experience, I, published 2 books. One was called Power BI for FinOps, which has been helpful to the, visibility and dashboards. And then the most recent one is called Gamification, How to Host FinOps Hackathons. And that's been taken off very well. So pleased to meet everyone.
Wow, we have some awesome FinOps leaders here, and I am honored and privileged to be part of this panel discussion. Really excited for today's session. But before we move on to the panel discussion, we have one, poll for the audience. So audience, you will see a question on your screen shortly. This is the multiple choice question. So please, you can select more than one options. So what are the top challenges faced by organizations while adopting FinOps? Collaboration between teams, setting and tracking KPIs, choosing the right FinOps tool, understanding the broader scope of FinOps other than cost reduction, and lack of skilled FinOps personnel. You have 30 seconds to answer. Looking forward to see what bubbles up out here. Okay, ending the poll now. Let's see the results. Yes, so we see that understanding the broader scope of FinOps has come out as one of the key challenges, as well as setting and tracking KPIs. And that is very similar to what other reports also that I've gone through. And understanding the broader scope of FinOps is something definitely we'll start the other panel discussion with. So let's get started. So the first challenge, or rather a myth that we're going to talk about, is cost reduction as the only scope of FinOps. Now, 45% of organizations prioritize immediate cost savings for FinOps. Most people think that FinOps is solely about reducing costs. However, pigeonholing it in such a way prevents organizations from extracting maximum value while adopting FinOps. Let's hear more about it from our panelists, starting with Deepak. Deepak, what additional benefits does FinOps provide apart from immediate cost savings, and how crucial are they for successfully implementing FinOps practices?
Thanks for kicking that off with such a, I would say, the most important aspect of FinOps. I think there is no denying the fact that cost is a big challenge for most cloud leaders today. And also, most of the companies who are looking at FinOps, they do it because of cost reasons. So that is the main reason why they are looking at FinOps, because costs are going off hand, and then they think that, okay, what is the framework? What are the best practices? And then that's where FinOps comes into picture. Having that said, we always say at FinOps and at CloudKeeper that FinOps is not about saving money. It is about making money. We also, that's like one thing and we also say that it's not about cost savings. It's about cost optimization. So it's not like most of the time it would happen that you would get some cost savings, but sometimes costs might also go up if that is the need of the business. So, the way we look at as part of FinOps Foundation and also at CloudKeeper is that FinOps is about balancing costs and aligning your cloud spend with the business needs. And so, for example, let's say if you're truly adopting FinOps, and then that definitely helps you get a very nuanced understanding of your cloud costs on one hand. Second, it also helps you establish shared and complete ownership of all your cloud spend. And then that in turn helps you make like conscious trade-off decisions between cost, quality, and speed. So it's not like, okay, the only focus is on cost reduction, but you are also focused on achieving the business outcomes, which could be related to agility, innovation, security, and other things. So I think just thinking that, okay, FinOps is all about cost reduction, and maybe that might not be the priority for you at today, but I'm sure it will become a priority someday. And then thinking that FinOps, one of the myths that people have is that FinOps is going to slow them down. No, we are not here to slow you down. We are actually trying to, help you optimize your cloud spend, but at the same time, helping you achieve all the other intangible benefits of cloud, such as agility, speed, security, and other good things. So that's how I look at it. I mean, that's like a very high level my take on the scope of FinOps not being limited to cost reduction. Happy to hear what other panel members have to say.
Sure. Thank you so much, Deepak. But you said it so nicely that, FinOps is about making money, which is so true that as FinOps really empowers the delivery teams by removing obstacles and, enabling them to deliver more efficiently and, helping businesses contribute to the long-term growth. So actually, it's there for the longer term that, you should see it. So great. Moving on to VAS. VAS at FinOps Foundation, I have seen that in the last few years, the focus has been shifting. I mean, it has shifted actually from cost to value, right? So how can organizations effectively balance the focus on immediate cost savings with the broader strategic objectives or, the values that FinOps brings to the table?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, Deepak definitely touched on, and was spot on, definitely touched on the key elements of, that cost versus value balance that you constantly need to be aware of. What's really interesting is this mini poll really reflects what we've seen in the broader community in terms of the survey results. And I will say that, there's nothing wrong with looking for cost savings. Obviously, all businesses want to be running optimally as possible. The challenge with just focusing on cost savings is that tends to be a very reactive approach to cloud. And so the reason why we talk about value, and you'll see that we've, constantly try and push that message to the community to look beyond cost savings, is because you want to ideally develop a practice and an approach to cloud that moves beyond this reactive cost savings approach where you want to be planning. I think folks like to use the term shift left in terms of like being aware of during the planning stages and the architecture stages of going to cloud, being aware of the decisions that you make, just like you make decisions around security, just like you make decisions around capacity and redundancy and resiliency. We are now trying to make sure that there's a conversation or there's space for talking about spend decisions as well. And so moving that conversation earlier into your deployment allows you not only to achieve sort of cost savings in the future by planning for them, but it also now starts shifting the conversation to that value. What is important to your business at this moment in time? And so that's really why we're trying to focus on, talking about the value, having conversations earlier. And that's sort of like my perspective on that question.
Thank you, Waz. I think that was really nicely said because, I mean, that approach of shifting left has to be at every function, at every person's level. Only then you can approach the final objectives of what you want to achieve through FinOps. Great. So, Brian, now we know that, FinOps brings us many other values to the table, such as improved transparency, better decision-making, increased agility, to name a few. So, Brian, what strategies do you recommend for organizations to shift their focus towards recognizing these other values apart from cost savings?
Yes, yeah, great question, and then thank you, and I agree with the peers, Vas and Deepak. FinOps is about maximizing business value, and when we talk about business value, also translates to revenue, profit. Like we're all in it to make money, and FinOps can be a big part of that. But the adoption of FinOps, it's a journey, as we all know. And typically it begins with cost savings. So that's why we hear and we see about it up front. How do we get those quick wins, that low hanging fruit, and let's see some savings. But as enterprise organizations begin to mature in the adoption of FinOps, this is where they should begin to seek more data-driven decisions. And they can do that with the type of KPIs that they use to measure that business value that's obtained with the investment of cloud. Now, how do you do that? I have a good analogy, also, related to my background and even the podcast. I'm also an e-commerce business owner. I interviewed over 100 self-made multimillionaires in e-commerce space, and related to that, this is a good analogy, a parallel to the cloud. In the e-commerce world, they have a KPI that's called your ROAS, and your ROAS stands for return on ad spend. So a business owner would know that if they have a ROAS of say $4, I have a $4 ROAS. That means for every $1 I spend on advertising, I'm getting $4 back. Now, if you knew that KPI, that's what you had in selling and marketing this product, how many times would you make that advertising? Like, you would do it as much as you can. And that's what these successful e-commerce entrepreneurs do. Now, as we relate it to cloud, I like to call it something similar. I call it rocks. So what is your return on cloud spend? And you can now begin to measure, for every dollar that I spend in the cloud, what is my return on investment? Now, with related to the cloud, it can be a little bit broad, because, sometimes it's directly related to revenue, but it can also be related to other type of metrics. And I like to call that your North Star metrics. So I would say, as organizations begin to mature, identify your North Star metrics. It would be great if it's related to your revenue, because you could track that directly. But in some cases, it could be something like, active users or subscriptions or many different things that's important to that particular business. So you would look to measure that and then tie that against your investment of your cloud spend. So, it's really about, taking those type of metrics, KPIs. And I would say, even for organizations, you might be familiar with like your OKRs, where it's like, okay, that's another example of where they're defining their business values. Like, what does the value mean? Now let's take that and let's map that to our cloud spend. And if we're able to identify that KPI, which I call rocks, what is your return on cloud spend? You map that together, then that'd be a good indicator for, how well you're investing in the cloud.
Thank you, Brian. Nicely said that, it's actually about realizing that value first and then, setting up KPIs and tracking them to see that, how you're actually driving that value. So let's move on to the next challenge that we want to talk about today, which is team collaboration. About 43% of the organizations prioritize overcoming cross-functional collaboration challenges when it comes to managing cloud costs effectively. So let's talk about how lack of communication between teams, misalignment of goals, and siloed workflows in teams often hinder the adoption of FinOps. Vas, I'll start with you. The FinOps framework has been recently updated, and I was reading an article written by you. Few of the principles that have been outlined with respect to collaboration in the framework are that the teams need to collaborate, centralized team drives FinOps, and everyone takes ownership of their cloud usage. So Vas, could you expand on each of these and why they are significant? Maybe you can just talk about each of those, why they're important.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I'll start off by just saying, if it's not obvious, FinOps is a team sport, and it does require collaboration across all the folks that you just mentioned. And, we always say that, if your FinOps practice has been set up successfully, you don't need to be in the room when DevOps or finance is getting together to talk about cloud data, because you've normalized the concepts around the principles that you just described, and folks understand the elements of the framework that allow them to collaborate together. In the early days, we used to say that FinOps allows for a common language across sort of what traditionally have been silos inside of a larger enterprise. And so what those principles are attempting to do is kind of describe that common language and who's responsible for what. We did recently update the framework, but interestingly, we did not change the principles at all. They're the same as they were from the beginning. And so I would say that the one big change that we did make, though, is we formalized a category of colleagues, if you will, or folks in an organization that we're calling allied personas. So we've always had the core personas, right? Your engineer, your product or business owner, your FinOps practitioner, but we've formalized this category called allied personas. And these are folks that aren't necessarily doing FinOps directly, but if you take those principles that you described, the data that the FinOps practice generates enables those folks to have better business outcomes as part of their disciplines. And what's really interesting is we've always talked about these folks. These folks are, ITAM folks, ITFM folks, folks that are in security. They've always been part of the conversation, but I think what we've done is recognizing how important this cultural piece is and this collaboration piece is. And we want to make sure that we've established them. We've created a firm category for them, and we're acknowledging that these folks are integral to the success of your overall business, because your overall business does include the success of your business does include all these other disciplines as well.
Thank you so much, Vas. Just a follow-up question to that. You also, in the report, it also talks about how important executive buy-in is.
Yeah.
The collaboration. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. So I will tell you, one of the things that I really love about this year's State of FinOps report is folks are really, I don't want to say brave, but they're finally calling out, what I think is a very crucial element. Yes, you can start and establish a FinOps practice using grassroots efforts. Yes, you can kind of look to your action-oriented or the folks that really like getting things done to kind of stretch their day-to-day roles to include FinOps activities. But in my experience, ultimately, to have a successful FinOps practice, to include the things that Deepak and Brian have touched on so far, you need leadership support. Your leaders need to give permission to your engineers, to your finance folks who are already really busy and they've got their own KPIs for making their business successful. They need to say, it's okay for you to think about FinOps concepts and include them as part of your day-to-day activities. And if I'm excited about that, it's because I feel like it's really, been under talked about topic. People feel like, yeah, we just need grassroots, or, if I just work 2 extra hours a day for FinOps, we can do FinOps successfully. You really need leadership support. And it's really great to see that being reflected in the State of FinOps survey results.
Great. Thank you, Vas. Moving on to Deepak. Deepak, given your experience in FinOps, which practices can be adopted to enhance team collaboration for better accountability?
Thank you, Saloni, and thank you, Vas, for, I think you've given a very good base of overall understanding about how can we improve, why team collaboration is important and how can it be enhanced. But some of the things that we have implemented across our engagements and how we have advised our clients. I'll start with what Vas already mentioned about establishing a common language. I think that's the basic starting point without which you can't even get started. You must have a common language for business, technology, and finance team to start talking about cloud cost. And if they're all talking about in their own language, then it becomes very difficult and very frustrating for them to understand each other. So that's probably the most important point. Without that, all other efforts are actually going waste. So I'll just keep repeating it, but that's very important. After that, I would say that few things. Obviously, you should have a common understanding and a joint ownership of the budget and a common understanding of the overall business goals. So again, everybody should understand that it is not only about cost, and there are other business goals and business value that you're trying to achieve with cloud adoption and with FinOps. Couple of small interventions that we have found helpful is that, okay, everyone should have real-time access to the reports. So they should all be accessing, obviously, the real-time reports. Where multiple divisions or multiple product teams are involved, then we've found that, okay, you should have an accurate tagging mechanism and a transparent chargeback and showback mechanism in place. I think Vas spoke about engineering teams, the importance of bringing engineering teams into the picture, because we should, again, try to bring as much things left. And as FinOps Foundation talks about that, you should put data in the path of the engineers, because engineers are probably the most important stakeholder, arguably. And until unless you provide them with data, you cannot expect them to take action. So you have to put data in the path of the engineers. so that they can make those cost conscious programming decisions, because most of the cost decisions are taken when the engineer is doing their programming. And last but not the least, I think there should be a very clear understanding of what is the centralized FinOps team is going to do. For example, all the rate optimization related actions and decisions can be taken by the centralized FinOps team, and what is decentralized, which is mostly usage optimization and architecture optimization.
Thank you,
I'll
Deepak.
just take a pause there. Yeah.
No, those were some great insights. Thank you so much, Deepak. We can now move on to Brian. Brian, can you share some practical insights or examples wherein, you have seen effective collaboration amongst the different teams and that, that basically contributing to the success of the FinOps initiative?
Yes. Thank you, Saloni. Related to, team collaboration within FinOps and the framework, organizational alignment is not just a buzzword. It's a key part of FinOps adoption to actually get things, working effectively within a company. And, related to that, it's kind of related to that recent book that I published, which I called Gamification, How to Host a FinOps Hackathon. The story behind that was, I was working with a company, had little over $40 million in cloud spend, and they were in the process of FinOps adoption. They're in the early crawl stage. And related to that, we decided they wanted to get the cross-functional teams engaged and to have an appreciation and adoption awareness for FinOps. And this is where, we decided to put together a FinOps hackathon. So it's basically, building off of, one of the most common challenges that we saw that was even stated in the state of FinOps over the past few years is just enabling engineers to take action, getting cross-functional teams to care and to take action on FinOps. Just the nature of the hackathon was just kind of like, fit for it. It was a gamification to actually, tee up some problem statements, which were based upon the company's needs, where like, okay, here's the data, here's some problem statements. Now, for the team that was joining, they're now solutioning for, how they can best come up with some solutions to help the company achieve savings, reduce waste, and so on. And to make a long story short, just imagine these teams, get in a session to work together in a hackathon, all tailored around FinOps. And it was cross-functional teams. So it was like engineers, product teams, DevOps teams, and so on. And they were all like solutioning. And when they were presenting their solutions to the judges, and the judges were like the leaders within the company, literally one of the leaders was like, "This is the best 2-hour meeting I've ever had." Like, I was watching him, and the way he spoke, it was like a proud parent watching their kids, see their employees coming up with solutions to help bring more value to the company. And the type of innovative solutions was just amazing. And when you think about it, it really checked off quite a few things, which was like, one, they got solutions that they could take action on. So actual demoed solutions to remediate some cloud waste. But then also, too, it just created this education and awareness and now an appreciation for cross-functional teams. So like, just the nature of the way that it played out, I was like, okay, there's a lot of aspects to this, but as it relates to team collaboration, it was a great way to really accelerate and get people engaged. And this took place, I would say the planning of it took place from concept to actual closing out the event, where we hosted the event. It was over the course of 5 weeks. So it was a 5-week from planning to closure. But yeah, it turned out to be really good.
Wow, Brian, that was a real stupendous real world example. Thank you for sharing. We now move on to our third challenge that we're going to talk about, which is KPI setting and tracking. Now, setting the right KPIs is pivotal to the success of any FinOps initiative. However, organizations often face challenges in determining which metrics to track and how to effectively measure them. Let's explore the common challenges encountered in setting FinOps KPIs and what are the strategies to overcome them. Let's start off with Vaz. So Vaz, can you just touch upon what are some of the essential KPIs that organizations should track in order to measure the effectiveness of their FinOps implementations?
For sure. Yeah. And basically, in a nutshell, it depends. There's no easy answer to this question. And that's a nice little inside joke that we have here at the FinOps Foundation, that a lot of your decisions, it depends. I will say that part of the challenge, or at least the mindset I feel like you should adopt, is progress over perfection. Because really the challenge with KPIs is they will change. They will change based on your FinOps maturity level. They will change based on, we talked earlier about collaboration. So they will change based on the collaboration progress that you've made across the different personas in your organization that are participating. And they will also change, obviously, based on your capabilities in the cloud. And so that's the one aspect, is progress over perfection, and kind of taking that mindset. The second one is deciding, a good balance of not just internal KPIs, but also across your industry. What is it you want to be conscious of in terms of helping you create that value that we talked about earlier? And so, I think with those two in mind, then you can sit down and say, okay, there's unlimited number of KPIs that you can pick. The real question is, what is most important to your business at this point in your cloud journey? And what is sort of that Venn diagram overlap of what is the value you're trying to create? And that's how you decide your KPIs, I feel, and you should be prepared to evolve them. So your KPIs might be, if you're starting out, we talked earlier about cost savings and how that's a reactive exercise. Your KPIs might be literally just around saving, and measuring quarter over quarter or month over month. But eventually, I would say, and not to take up too much time because we could talk about KPIs forever, but I would say that your goal should be to develop what I would call sort of unit metrics or KPIs around unit economics. So while initially you might start off with some easy KPIs around like how much have I saved on storage or compute, eventually what you really want to do is start measuring a set of KPIs tied to your business. And if your business is ride share, or if your business is in page views, you really want to start tracking the value of your cloud spend against those KPIs. What is cloud costing versus your revenue? And Brian really nicely, I think, touched on that earlier. I forget the acronyms, Brian, but I think you were kind of like foreshadowing this conversation. So that's my 2 cents on KPIs. It really depends, and come with a progress over perfection mindset.
Great. Very nicely explained, was. I think it covers up really, it sets up the whole foundation for this discussion. And like you said, it depends, because the FinOps landscape is changing very rapidly. The businesses are evolving. So, that those KPIs will definitely need to evolve accordingly. So Deepak, moving on to you, you have worked with a lot of, companies which are just starting off their FinOps journey, right? So as organizations start off their FinOps journey, which are the KPIs they should prioritize initially? If you could throw some light on that.
Sure. Thanks, Saloni. And looks like I'll again be paraphrasing what Vas has already mentioned, but let me anyway do that from our experience working with, let's say, but you've kind of made it a little bit more qualified by saying that, okay, some of the early stage companies who are starting their FinOps journey. So as the saying goes, you cannot improve what you cannot measure. So KPIs are important. So there's no denying the fact. What you want to measure is also a very intentional decision. So you don't want to start measuring everything what your neighbors or other peers are doing, because it's always a function of what your needs are at that moment in time, at that stage of the business that you're in. So I mean, it has to be a very conscious decision. I would say that don't ask others what KPIs they're measuring. You should really ask yourself, okay, what is my need, and then identify the KPIs which are relevant for you. But in general, I would say for companies who are just starting their FinOps journey and are looking for some of no-brainer kind of KPIs, I mean, we usually say that, okay, pick up a mix of KPIs, which is a combination of rate optimization, usage optimization, and architecture optimization. I mean, these are generally, that's the framework that we use. Okay, these are like 3 levers, and you should probably pick up something from each one of them. And to begin with, all the KPIs should be relatively easy to measure, and ideally, hopefully, they should deliver some quick results if you're like looking to improve on them. So I'll just like pick 4 or 5, share 4 or 5 KPIs that we that come up very often. So with regards to rate optimization, I think effective savings rate or RI/savings plan coverage always comes up. So that's the foundational or the starting point when it comes to rate optimization. When it comes to usage, I think we start with compute utilization, the average CPU utilization across the product or across the whole business, whatever your scope is. Then we move on to another like important KPI, especially in the case of AWS, is okay, what is the percentage of spend that is coming from spending on older generation hardware? Because that's in a way a technical debt that you're kind of carrying. So let's say running older generation EBS volumes or CPU. So that is yet another metric that you can kind of track to make sure that it is there in front of you, and then you can take a decision whenever you want. But percentage of spend coming from older generation hardware. Then we say that okay, maybe if you are focused on improving your architecture, and if you're moving towards microservices or a serverless architecture, then you could also start measuring what is the percentage of spend that is on consumption based services as opposed to provision based services. And lastly, we like to throw in some business KPI, as Vas was saying, that it is not about the aggregate spend, but it is more about the unit economics. So what you really want to improve is the unit economics. You don't want to bring down the aggregate spend. For a business where cloud spend is like directly proportional to the revenue, you would ideally like the cloud cost to keep going up, aggregate cloud spend, but you would like unit economics to improve. So you can pick up a business related metric, which could be cloud cost as a percentage of revenue, or cloud cost per ride, cloud cost per transaction, whatever depends on your business. So we recommend that you start with some easy KPIs that you really focus on, and get into the discipline of measuring these KPIs, publishing them, see that okay, they are improving on a month-on-month, quarter-on-quarter basis. And then once you have gotten into the rhythm, then you can probably move on to little higher order KPIs. And so that's what we kind of recommend and advise.
Thank you so much, Deepak. This is really insightful, and it has also answered some of the questions that people were asking around it. So great, thank you. Moving on to Brian. Brian, you mentioned about one of the KPIs, ROCS, return on cloud spend. Any other KPIs that you have found impactful, and how do these KPIs translate into actionable insights for organizations?
Yeah, thank you, Saloni. Yeah, related to the KPIs, I mean, the reality is that most organizations is going to have a big list of KPIs to be able to work with, and it's about prioritization and how are you going to prioritize it. And I think Vas and Deepak, touched on that very well. For me, I like to group them in a similar fashion. I typically group the KPIs into like 5 categories. One being what I call purchasing effectiveness. So related to what was already touched on, like rate optimization, RI, savings plans, spot instances, those type of KPIs you'd relate to there. The second is utilization optimization. So the type of KPIs you'd be looking at is, related to right sizing, intelligent tiering, serverless. Those would be like some options that you'd look at. And then the third category I'd like to look at is unused resources. So this is your cloud waste. I like to call it zombie assets. And I feel like a zombie hunter when you get to go find these things. But really, it's about also applying like life cycle management on some of these resources, so that you're not building up a bunch of technical debt or waste. And then the fourth is operational efficiency. So this is related to measuring how well are you doing in automation. So when you get to as you're on your FinOps journey, eventually you want to get to a point where you're beginning to automate a lot of these things. How are you operating efficiently? So that establishment of policies for governance and so on. Then the last one I'd like to refer to as demand management. So having that ability, and this is related to maturity, the ability to auto scale or elastic scaling, that ability to size up or size down based upon demand. That's one of the takeaways as well that you want to be sure to communicate to the organization, is that you're not sacrificing performance or capability for the sake of cost. You want to be efficient. And that's really the the point to get across there. But I would say, one more that I could touch on related to KPIs is just like, like we said, it's a journey. It starts with visualization. So you'll have some type of like visualization capability, reporting, dashboard. But then the other thing related to actionable insights is that one of the things that I really enjoyed that's been implemented is like tracking what you've already been taking action on. So it's one thing to like, hey, we see all these potential savings, but what about highlighting and recognizing the actions that you actually took? So don't let that be gone in the wind. You want to be able to highlight that, surface those victories, surface those wins. I like to call it a victory tracker. So when we're talking about all these different KPIs, where it's like, right sizing or, reducing the zombie assets or whatever, those are real savings. Let's highlight that in these wins and surface that to the top so that now leadership begins to see like, oh, hey, we're moving forward. And when they begin to see that, especially if there's cross-functional teams that were helping, make them a part of that, give that type of recognition. And that really goes a long ways. And then organizational leadership, appreciate that a lot, and if they see that on a monthly basis, it's really positive. It keeps the momentum going related to FinOps.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was really good. And, in terms of the key standout for me was with Victory Tracker. And, it's all about taking actions on the KPIs, basically the results that you see. Great. So with this, we move on to the last poll of today. You should be able to see it on your screen. Which of the following tools are you currently using for FinOps? Again, this is a multiple choice question. Homegrown, hyperscaler native, third party, or not using any tool. Now, as per the State of FinOps Foundation, the State of FinOps report, number of tools and average number of tools used by FinOps practitioners are around 4.1. So definitely this could have multiple answers, Great. So we have some initial results out here. As per this poll, as per the current audience that we have out here, they're using a third party or they're not using any tool. So we really have two extreme, corners. So great. We can move on to our last challenge that we're going to talk about today, which is the challenge about choosing the right FinOps tool. Now, selecting the appropriate tools is a critical step in implementing FinOps successfully. However, organizations are often struggling considering the overwhelming number of options available in the market. 64% of the organizations, as per a recent report, chose the tools provided by FinOps service providers without even mapping it to their requirements or to their KPIs. Now, let's cover the nuances of FinOps tool selections with our panelists. We have one question which I would like to ask all of you, and you can all touch upon it. What strategies do you recommend for organizations to effectively assess their needs and select the right tools and processes that align with their specific goals and objectives for FinOps implementation? Vaz, we could probably start with you.
Sure, yeah. So I think this is a really great question because especially if you're relatively new to FinOps or you're just kind of trying to wrap your arms around your cloud spend, there's a real temptation of thinking that you can either build it yourself or you can just go buy a single tool that'll take care of all your use cases. And what we've seen, what's really interesting, again, the little mini survey that you did really reflects and aligns with what we see with the broader community in that people are using more than one tool, right? So in the early days, the cloud native tools weren't very robust. I have to give them credit. They've done a great job improving them. The FinOps landscape for tools has really evolved. There's some great tools out there, like CloudKeeper, who are really keen on unit economics and kind of helping you with your KPIs and your optimization. But then, of course, there's also your business, right? Your organization is unique. It's why I said earlier, doing FinOps, the inside joke is it depends is the answer to most questions, is because your business is unique. And so there's nothing wrong with developing internal tools as well. In fact, what we see now, especially the evolution over the last 3 or 4 years, is most folks in the community that are doing FinOps are using at least 4 tools. right? So it's a combination of some native tools, some commercial tools, some internal homegrown or tools that they've built themselves. And so you should expect that. And part of the reason for that as well is in the early days, what we would see is folks who typically would deploy to one cloud, but it's more typical now. Your business will probably sit across at least two clouds, if not more. And so you're going to need to adopt tooling that's going to be flexible. And having said all that, I think the underlying message that I would leave this question with is what you're really looking for is interoperability, meaning you need to be able to get the information in the format for the persona that needs it. Context is everything. And so being able to curate your data from various sources and consolidate it so that you can tell a story for that particular executive or that particular engineer. So the interoperability of all these tools is really fundamental, a thing that folks probably just don't think about. And then, of course, the other thing is having a standard lexicon. We talked about earlier about having common language. Well, when you look at data and billing data, every billing source, whether it's the major public cloud vendors, whether it's your SaaS vendor, whether it's your internal reporting system, it's going to have its own lexicon. It's going to have its own schema. So essentially, this interoperability requirement that I'm talking about feeds into creating that common lexicon that you as a organization, your FinOps practitioners, your engineers, all your personas sit together and decide, okay, how are we going to report on cost? How are we going to report on unit economics? Is amortization an important element for these personas? So having that flexibility and that interoperability is very important. So I think when selecting a tool, I think those have become more important than just finding a tool that solves all your use cases.
Thank you so much, Was. Definitely, many things for me to learn from this panel discussion. Moving on to Brian, maybe, if you can expand, if you can share more on what you think about this.
Yeah. And Vas, you hit the nail on the head. From my experience, companies are always looking to make a decision of build versus buy. And like you mentioned in the stats, they're on average using 4.1 tools, and it's a mixture. So, cloud native, homegrown, where you just kind of build within, or use a third party tool there. And what I would recommend, and this is what I've done in the past, is to, for your organization, build a tooling capability matrix. So basically, take the capabilities that you're looking to develop within the organization and the tools, and just kind of like score them appropriately. Because one of the things that I've seen, that there's not one tool that's like a silver bullet that solves everything for FinOps, even though some companies may try to sell you on that idea, but it's not the case. And it's the reason why you see the stats that there's 4.1 tools on average. So but what you want to do is to go through that exercise of listing down the capabilities you're looking to enable, and then find the right tools that will match accordingly, because different tools have different strengths and so on. And I did see on the survey, the response there, that some people didn't have any tools to begin with. So related to that, you may already have tools in your tool chest that you may not even realize. And that's why it's part of the other reason why I wrote that book on the Power BI for FinOps, because most organizations, they most likely have like an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, and they have like 365 and so on. That means you have Power BI in your tool chest. And what that means is, Power BI, just to put a little stats behind it, Gartner has ranked that tool as a number one for the past 16 years in a row related to business intelligence. So it's a tool you may already have in your tool chest. I would relate that to that homegrown, type of capability, and that'll allow you to, to at least get those initial stages of visualizing those KPIs that we talked about, and so on. And then from there, use a tooling capability matrix to now begin to explore what are some other tools that can begin to help. And this is where you'll explore with, third parties and so on.
Great. Thanks, Brian. I think it's really all about what suits you and your business and what you want to take ahead. Great. That brings us to an end to this panel discussion. We have 5 minutes left, so we could take up the Q&A if the panelists have time. Maybe another 10 minutes we can extend to. Are you all okay, Deepak, Vaz, and Brian? Great. Maybe we can take up one question per panelist. So here we have a question for Vaz. Vaz, how do you address cultural barriers or resistance to change when promoting cross-team collaboration for FinOps adoption?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's sort of like the age-old question whenever you're trying to do something new inside of an organization. And so I think, I posted a link in the Zoom chat for a resource that probably will go into more in depth in terms of helping you create sort of a way or a strategy for those cultural barriers. But in a nutshell, I would say first decide what it is that you're trying to achieve. Make sure you socialize that. And I think the third thing would be also to look for allies. We talked about the different personas in FinOps. Look for allies. We keep saying FinOps is also a cultural practice. I think that's hand in hand with finding allies. And once you start socializing what it is you're trying to achieve, and you have allies that can sort of talk to the various stakeholders that they represent in a language that makes sense to them, then you can start building that bridge of creating that common FinOps language, and then start looking at what we talked earlier about KPIs, what it is you want to achieve. And then you can start then bringing people on board. But I would say that this is, again, it really depends on your org. Some orgs, we talked earlier about having leadership support. Some orgs maybe require sort of a very specific directive from their leadership to overcome these barriers. Other orgs are able to do it through grassroots. And that's why I shared that resource in the Zoom chat so that folks can kind of take a look at a roadmap for FinOps and kind of pick from that resource what makes sense for their organizational culture.
Thank you so much, Vaz. Right. I think we can pick up one more question. This question is for Brian. Brian, how can smaller organizations with limited resources effectively identify and track for FinOps implementation? And I think you worked with many.
Yeah. So even and this is where I would say, even related to Power BI, it might be a tool you already have in your tool chest, but that are cloud native, like Vasa touched on, that they've been getting better. And now they're making a commitment. I mean, in GCP, they have what's called the FinOps Hub. AWS has been enabling things. Microsoft is going all in on the focus standards. So I would say, even to start out with, definitely explore all the cloud native opportunities that you have to visualize your data, but then also begin to set up your extracts from that, your exports. And from those exports, that's where you can then begin to leverage some other tools. I would say most companies would already have Power BI in your tool chest, and you can begin to slice and dice and do your own things to get things started. But those would be two good ways to get started.
Thank you so much, Brian. Keeping the time in mind, we will have to end the panel discussion, but thank you so much for all your questions. I mean, especially to the audience. You have asked a lot of questions. We will get back to you over email as soon as possible. Vaz, Brian, Deepak, I think I have really enjoyed today's panel discussion. Thank you so much for your valuable contributions and insights. Vaz and Brian have also shared some resources in the chat window, so thank you so much for that. It's been a privilege to host this. And I think our audience also learned a lot. I can see that, audience engaged a lot. So audience, thank you so much for your engagement and participation in today's panel. We hope you found the session valuable. I look forward to the opportunity to speak to you all again in the future. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much.